I still remember the burning. Not just on my skin, though, trust me. That latte was scalding, but the burning behind my eyes. The absolute humiliation of standing there, dripping wet, while Jessica's perfect red lipstick curved into a smile so smug I wanted to scream. Fetch me another one, intern, and try not to mess up the order this time. The entire conference room erupted in laughter. 8 people, most of whom I'd barely spoken to, suddenly unified in their amusement at my expense. Coffee running down my cream blouse, seeping into my bra, the smell of hazelnut and shame filling my nostrils. I'd worked at Blackridge Partners for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of being called intern, despite being hired as a financial analyst. 3 weeks of Jessica Gordon treating me like her personal assistant instead of her colleague. God, I'm shaking even telling this story now. Before I go on, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe. I promise this gets good. And I really want to know in the comments if you've ever had someone like Jessica in your life. Someone who made you feel small just because they could. Anyway, I'm Renata. I'm 34 now, but I was 31 when all this happened. I'm not particularly impressive looking average height. Brown hair, I never know what to do with. The kind of face people say looks friendly when they're being nice. I'm the person who brings baked goods to the office and remembers everyone's birthdays. The one who laughs a little too loudly sometimes and apologizes too much. I'd spent most of my career at smaller firms, working my way up gradually, until my uncle Leon passed away. He wasn't rich by any means, but he'd invested wisely over the years in a handful of companies. One of those was Blackridge. His will left me his entire portfolio, including a 17% stake in Blackridge Partners, which technically made me the 3rd largest individual shareholder. But here's the thing, nobody at Blackridge knew that. When I applied for the job, I used my mother's maiden name. I wanted to understand the company from the inside before making any decisions about my inheritance. Were they ethical? Did they treat people well? Was this somewhere I wanted my money invested long-term? Jessica Gordon was giving me my answer, one humiliating coffee splash at a time. She was head of client acquisitions, 38, blonde, immaculate, the kind of woman who somehow never has a wrinkle in her clothes or a hair out of place. She wore her power like expensive perfume, too much of it, and always making sure you noticed. That morning, she'd asked me to grab coffee for the pre-meeting. I'd done it, even though it wasn't remotely my job, because I was still the newest person and trying to be helpful. She'd taken one sip, scrunched up her face like I'd handed her sewage, and then, splash. Right in my face, in front of everyone. Jessica, I said quietly, coffee dripping from my chin onto the conference table. That was completely unnecessary. Oh my God, she rolled her eyes dramatically. Learn to take a joke, and learn how to make a proper coffee. I asked for almond milk. This is clearly oat milk. It wasn't. It was exactly what she'd asked for. I knew because I'd triple-checked her order after she'd corrected me twice already. I specifically asked for, I started, but she cut me off. God, just go clean yourself up, you look pathetic. She turned to her colleague, Daniel, who was failing to hide his smirk. This is why we don't hire from state schools, Daniel. For the record, I have an MBA from Northwestern. Not that it should matter. I stood there, frozen. I've always been the kind of person who thinks of the perfect comeback 3 hours later while staring at my bedroom ceiling. In that moment, all I could feel was shame crawling up my neck like a rash. Then the door opened. Martin Chen, the CFO, walked in with a manila folder and a look of concern when he saw me standing there, stained and shaking. "What happened here?" he asked, glancing between me and Jessica. "Just a little accident," Jessica said smoothly. "Our intern is a bit clumsy." Martin frowned slightly but seemed too preoccupied to question it further. "Well, I have the updated shareholder information for the quarterly review. Jessica, you'll need to incorporate this into your presentation for tomorrow." He passed out copies from his folder. I watched as everyone at the table received their packet. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise. This wasn't how I'd planned for my identity to be revealed, but maybe it was perfect timing after all. Martin?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I believe I should have a copy as well." Jessica let out an exasperated sigh. This is confidential financial information. Interns don't receive these packets. Actually, Martin said, looking at me more carefully. She's right. Ms. Caldwell should have a copy. Jessica frowned. Miss who? Her name is Renata Baker. Martin handed me a packet. Baker is her mother's name. Caldwell is her legal surname. The room went quiet as everyone looked down at the papers, scanning until they found the shareholder list. I could pinpoint the exact moment each person saw my name. Eyes widening, head snapping up to stare at me. Jessica flipped frantically through her pages. I watched her face drain of color as she found what she was looking for. Renata Caldwell. 17% ownership, she whispered. That's impossible. That would make you the third largest individual shareholder. I finished for her, wiping coffee from my cheek with the back of my hand. Yes. But you're an intern, she said, her voice small now. Actually, Jessica, I said, standing up straighter despite the coffee still dripping from my blouse. I was hired as a financial analyst. And about your contract. The room was so silent you could hear the air conditioning hum. My contract? Her voice cracked slightly. I nodded slowly. Your department falls under shareholder review next month, doesn't it? 5 minutes earlier, I'd been the pathetic, coffee-soaked nobody. Now, every eye in that conference room looked at me differently. Fear, respect, confusion, it was all there. Let me pause for a second to say something that might sound strange. It didn't feel good. Not really. Have you ever had something you've fantasized about happening, but when it finally does, it just feels hollow? That's what it was like. I'd spent 3 weeks being invisible, being mistreated, gathering information about the toxic culture Jessica had created in her department. I'd learned that turnover in her team was 78% higher than any other department. I'd discovered she'd driven away 3 highly qualified candidates because they threatened her position. I'd watched her take credit for other people's work so many times I'd lost count. And now I had the power to do something about it. But power is complicated, right? I should backtrack a bit. My Uncle Leon wasn't just some random investor. He'd been on the founding team of Blackridge 30 years earlier, back when it was just 3 guys with a business plan working out of a garage. He stayed mostly behind the scenes, but he was brilliant with numbers and strategy. When he got sick, he started talking to me about the company, about its values, its people. The heart of any business is its people, Rennie. He'd told me during one of our last conversations. Not the clients, not the profits. The people who show up every day and choose to give their energy to something bigger than themselves. I'd promised him I'd look after his legacy. That's why I'd joined as a regular employee instead of waltzing in as a major shareholder. I needed to understand what Blackridge had become. And what it had become, at least in Jessica's department, was a place where people were afraid, where kissing up and kicking down was the fastest way to advance, where someone like Jessica could throw hot coffee at a colleague and expect everyone to laugh along. So there I stood, coffee-stained, and somehow holding all the cards. I think, I said carefully, this meeting should adjourn for now. I need to change, and I believe we all have some things to process. I turned to Martin. Could you schedule some time for us to speak privately this afternoon? He nodded quickly. Of course, Miss Caldwell. Whenever works for you. Jessica remained frozen, her perfect composure shattered. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. How to spin this. How to salvage her position. How to make me an ally instead of a threat. Renata, she said, her voice artificially warm. I'm so sorry about the coffee. It was just a joke that went too far. Let me take you to lunch today, my treat. We should get to know each other better. The whiplash of her sudden respect made me feel slightly nauseous. I have other plans for lunch, I said, but I'll be reviewing the organizational structure of your department this week. We can meet on Friday. I left that conference room with coffee-soaked dignity but a clear purpose. I wasn't going to be the villain of this story. I wasn't going to fire Jessica in some dramatic boardroom showdown. That's what people would expect. The sweet revenge of the underdog suddenly given power. But what I wanted wasn't revenge. What I wanted was change. Wait, no. That's a lie. I did want revenge. God, I wanted it so badly I could taste it, metallic and sweet like blood from biting my cheek. I wanted to see her squirm. I wanted to make her pack her designer handbags into a cardboard box and walk out of the building with security watching. And that's the part of myself I didn't particularly like. The part that Uncle Leon would have been disappointed to see. I went home that day and sat on my bathroom floor, still smelling like hazelnut coffee, and I cried. Not because of Jessica, but because I finally understood the weight of what my uncle had left me. Not just shares in a company, but responsibility for people's livelihoods. The power to reshape someone's life with a single decision. I stayed home the next day, told them I needed time to review company materials, which wasn't entirely untrue. What I really needed was space to think about what kind of person I wanted to be. What kind of leader? By Wednesday, rumors were swirling. Jessica sent me 3 emails, each more desperate than the last, offering to mentor me, to show me the ropes of leadership, to forge a productive partnership. Thursday morning, I walked into Blackridge wearing my best blazer and the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was going to do. The whispers followed me down every hallway. People who'd never acknowledged my existence suddenly knew my name, my coffee order, my favorite lunch spot. It was surreal and honestly, a little gross. Jessica was waiting outside my tiny cubicle, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Renata, I've been trying to reach you. I put together some thoughts on departmental improvements I'd love to discuss. I nodded politely. We're still on for tomorrow, Jessica. 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Her smile faltered. Actually, I was hoping we could speak privately. Just the 2 of us. That won't be necessary, I said. Everything that needs to be said should be on record. I've invited HR to join us. The color drained from her face for the 2nd time that week. HR? But this is just a departmental discussion. We don't need to formalize anything yet. My coffee stains disagree, I said quietly. As I watched her walk away, heels clicking rapidly like a frightened heartbeat, I felt that pull again, the desire to crush her completely, to make an example of her, to show everyone what happens when you humiliate someone just because you think you can. I spent that night rehearsing what I would say, how I would restructure her department, how I would address her behavior, whether I would let her keep her job. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. And as I walked into that conference room where my humiliation had begun just 4 days earlier, I realized all eyes were on me now. Not with mockery, but with a weird kind of fearful respect that made me deeply uncomfortable. Jessica was already seated, a thick binder of materials in front of her, hair perfect, expression carefully composed. The HR director, Lucia, sat to my right. Martin chose a seat directly across from Jessica. I placed my coffee bot from the same cafe as Monday's disaster deliberately on the table between us. Let's begin, I said. The room felt different this time. 4 days earlier, I'd been invisible. Now everyone was watching me like I might spontaneously combust or announce world domination. Jessica's eyes kept darting between my face and the coffee cup, like she was calculating the odds of history repeating itself in reverse. God, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. Just once, very briefly. Just reach across and... But that's not who I am. Even if sometimes I wish it could be. I've spent the last few days reviewing the structure and performance of the client acquisitions department. I began. I've spoken with HR about turnover rates, exit interviews, and complaints filed over the past 18 months. Jessica's professionally pleasant smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened around her pen. I've also reviewed your personal performance metrics, Jessica. Here's where I want to pause the story and tell you something important. When you suddenly find yourself with power over someone who's been cruel to you, you learn something about yourself. Something that might surprise you. And it's not always something you like. Because in that moment, seeing Jessica's carefully controlled panic, feeling the entire room hold its collective breath, I liked it. I enjoyed watching her squirm. There was this dark, ugly satisfaction spreading through my chest, and part of me wanted to drag this out just to watch her suffer longer. That's the part of revenge they don't talk about in movies. How it can make you feel powerful and awful at the exact same time. Your client acquisition numbers are excellent, I continued. You've consistently exceeded targets for bringing in new business. Your presentations to the board have been exemplary. On paper, you're a stellar performer. Something like hope flickered in her eyes, like maybe she'd weathered the storm. However, I said, opening a folder of my own, your departmental turnover is catastrophic. In the past year alone, 17 employees have left your team. The exit interviews cite the same issues repeatedly. I looked directly at her now. Bullying, taking credit for others' work, creating a hostile work environment, threatening people's job security if they don't comply with demands outside their job description. Jessica's mask slipped for just a second before she recovered. With all due respect, Ms. Caldwell, high-performance environments aren't for everyone. I push my team because excellence requires pressure. Martin shifted uncomfortably. Jessica has always delivered results. At what cost? I asked quietly. The company has spent over $300,000 in recruitment and training costs just to replace the people who couldn't tolerate working with her. That's not counting the institutional knowledge lost or the clients who've complained about constantly dealing with new faces. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee. And then there's the matter of how you treat people you perceive as beneath you, like throwing hot coffee at a colleague because you could. That was a joke that went too far, Jessica said quickly. I've already apologized for that. Actually, you haven't, I replied. You offered to buy me lunch and mentor me once you realized I held significant power over your career. That's not an apology. That's self-preservation. Lucia from HR cleared her throat. We have documentation of 7 incidents over the past year that would qualify as workplace harassment, all involving Ms. Gordon. Jessica's perfect composure finally cracked. This is absurd. I've been with Blackridge for 9 years. I've brought in millions in new business. And you're going to let some nepotism case who's been here 5 minutes destroy my career over hurt feelings? The room went silent. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting to see if I'd explode. If this would become the corporate equivalent of a hair-pulling catfight. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of the games, tired of the posturing, tired of people like Jessica thinking cruelty was a leadership strategy. No one's destroying your career, Jessica, I said calmly. You're being offered a choice. I slid a document across the table to her. Option 1. You can accept a lateral move to our research division. Same salary, different responsibilities, no direct reports. A 6-month probationary period with regular check-ins from HR regarding professional conduct. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the paperwork. Option 2 is in the second folder, I continued. It details the severance package we're prepared to offer if you choose to leave Blackridge. You can't just demote me. Her voice rose sharply. I've earned my position. Your position includes managing people, I said. And you've demonstrated repeatedly that you're either unwilling or unable to do that ethically. She turned to Martin, desperation evident. You can't seriously be considering this. My client relationships alone will be handled by capable team members who already do most of the work anyway, I finished for her. According to their own statements. Jessica's face flushed red. You have no idea what it takes to succeed in this industry. I've had to be twice as tough, twice as aggressive as any man to get where I am. And now you want to punish me for not being nice enough? Her words hit something raw in me, because in some twisted way, I understood. Women in finance walk a brutal tightrope. Too soft and you're ineffective. Too hard and you're a bitch. I'd spent years tiptoeing that line myself. This isn't about being nice, I said quietly. This is about basic human decency. About not terrorizing your team. About not throwing hot coffee at someone because they used the wrong milk. She flinched at that. You have until Monday to decide, I continued. Take the weekend to consider your options. Jessica stood abruptly, gathering her papers with shaking hands. My attorney will be in touch, she snapped, striding toward the door. But we all heard the tremor in her voice. After she left, Martin turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That was handled differently than I expected, he said. How did you expect me to handle it? I asked. He shrugged. Honestly, I thought you'd fire her on the spot. Most people would have, given the opportunity and what she did to you. I nodded slowly. I considered it. Lucia looked relieved. I think the approach you've taken shows real leadership. Firing her outright could have created legal issues. Not to mention it might have seemed personally motivated. It would have been personally motivated, I admitted. That's exactly why I didn't do it. When the meeting ended, I went back to my cubicle, the same tiny space I'd occupied before everyone knew who I really was. I sat there for a long time wondering if I'd done the right thing. Had I been too harsh? Not harsh enough? Should I have just transferred to another department myself and avoided the whole mess? I expected to feel triumphant. I'd confronted my bully. I'd held her accountable. I'd used my power responsibly, even when the temptation to do otherwise had been strong. Instead, I just felt complicated, messy, human. By Monday morning, the office was buzzing with rumors. Jessica hadn't been seen. Her office door remained closed. People kept finding excuses to walk past my desk, hoping for gossip I wouldn't provide. At 9:15, Lucia from HR called. Jessica's made her decision. She'd like to meet with both of us at 10. My stomach nodded. I'd spent the weekend oscillating between guilt and righteous anger, between second-guessing myself and reminding myself of how it felt to stand there dripping with coffee while an entire room laughed. Jessica was already in the conference room when we arrived. Her makeup was flawless, as always, but there was something different about her, a stillness that hadn't been there before. She looked up as I entered. I've decided to accept the transfer to research. I nodded, relieved in a way I hadn't expected. I think that's a wise choice. Not because I agree with your assessment, she added quickly, but because I've invested too much in this company to walk away. Lucia pushed the paperwork across the table. We'll need to go through the terms again to make sure everything's clear. As Jessica signed her name on line after line, I felt no satisfaction, no joy, just a quiet certainty that this was necessary. Not just for me, but for every person who'd ever been made to feel small in her presence. When we finished, Jessica looked at me directly for the first time since entering the room. "You know," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I thought you were weak. That first day, when you just stood there with coffee dripping down your face, not fighting back. I thought you were pathetic." I said nothing, waiting. "I wonder if you'll still be the nice, smiling Renata a year from now," she continued. "Power changes people, usually not for the better." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But treating people with basic respect isn't about being nice. It's about being human." She gathered her things and stood. "Good luck with that philosophy. This industry will eat you alive." After she left, Lucia exhaled heavily. "Well, that could have gone worse." I smiled thinly. The day's still young. The next few weeks were a strange adjustment period. The client acquisitions team was reorganized. I moved to a proper office. My role expanded to include consulting on major financial decisions, as befitted my shareholder status. People stopped calling me intern and started calling me Ms. Caldwell instead. I missed being invisible sometimes, missed the clarity of being underestimated. Jessica and I avoided each other successfully for nearly a month. When we did pass in hallways, she'd nod stiffly, I'd nod back, and we'd continue in opposite directions. Office politics at its most basic. Then came the Anderson account presentation. It was a major potential client, one Jessica had been cultivating for months before her transfer. I'd been asked to join the pitch meeting because of my financial expertise. We found ourselves in the same conference room where she'd thrown coffee at me, the first time we'd been back there together since that day. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Jessica presented her research impeccably. I handled the financial projections. We functioned like professional strangers, neither acknowledging our history. The client seemed impressed, asking thoughtful questions that we answered in careful tandem. Afterward, as everyone filed out, I hung back to gather my notes. So did Jessica. The silence stretched between us like a tightrope. "Nice work in there," I finally said, because someone had to say something. She looked at me searchingly. "You didn't have to give me credit for the initial client contact. You could have taken that for yourself." I shrugged. "It was your work. I don't take credit for things I didn't do." "Unlike me?" The question had an edge, but also something like genuine curiosity. I didn't say that. She sighed, smoothing her already perfect hair. The research division isn't as terrible as I expected. It's quieter. I get to focus on the work instead of managing personalities. That's good? I wasn't sure where this conversation was headed. Jessica gathered her folders deliberately. I'm not going to apologize again, or pretend we're friends now, but I respect that you could have destroyed me, and you didn't. That was never my goal. Wasn't it? She looked at me sharply. Not even for a moment? I considered lying, then decided against it. For a moment, yes. Several moments, actually. But revenge fantasies are different from actions. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Well, anyway, thank you for not throwing coffee at me today. I wouldn't have shown the same restraint. And with that, she walked out. I sat there a long time after she left, turning our conversation over in my mind. It wasn't forgiveness, not from either side. It wasn't even really closure. It was just a moment of honest acknowledgement between two complicated women with complicated feelings. In the months that followed, Blackridge changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually. I used my position to implement stronger anti-bullying policies. Exit interviews became mandatory. Anonymous feedback channels were created for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Jessica remained in research, where by all accounts she excelled. We maintained our professional distance, though occasionally I'd catch her watching me in meetings with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Curiosity? Resentment? Something else entirely? When people ask me now about the coffee incident, and yes, it became legendary enough in company lore to earn that title, I usually just smile and change the subject. It's not because I'm embarrassed or because I regret how I handled things. It's because the story isn't really about coffee or contracts or corporate power plays. It's about what we do when we suddenly have power over someone who's hurt us. It's about the thin line between justice and vengeance. It's about recognizing that even people who've been cruel can be more complicated than they first appear. Sometimes at company events, Jessica and I still end up in the same conversational circle. There's always that moment of recognition, that shared memory of coffee splashing, of humiliation, of power suddenly shifting. We'll make brief eye contact, both acknowledging the moment without speaking of it. Then we'll return to discussing quarterly projections or market trends. Two professional women who once occupied opposite ends of a power dynamic, now existing in the complicated middle ground of mutual respect without friendship. I never did get coffee for anyone else at Blackridge. Small victories, right? So that's my story. Not a fairy tale revenge where the villain gets spectacularly destroyed and everyone cheers. Not a perfect resolution where former enemies become best friends. Just a messy human situation where I tried to do the right thing, even when part of me wanted to do the satisfying thing instead. If you've ever been in a position where someone treated you like you were nothing, only to later discover you held power they never suspected, well, I hope my story helps somehow. There's no perfect way to handle it, no guidebook for navigating that bizarre emotional terrain. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be when the tables turn, and hope that decision is one you can live with long after the satisfaction of revenge has faded. If you liked this story, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments if you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between revenge and something more complicated. And if Jessica happens to be watching this, the coffee shop on 9th still makes that hazelnut latte. Just saying.